How do you do, ladies and gentlemen? What's the real truth about Citizen Kane?
It'll probably turn out to be a very simple thing.
Hello, everybody. I'm Max.
And I'm Parker.
And welcome back to Better Than Citizen Kane, the highly subjective show where we look at a movie and ask the question, is it better than Citizen Kane?
If you like Citizen Kane, that's totally fine, because we're not really here to hate on it.
But when every movie ever made is a reasonable challenger for the title of greatest film of all time, you have to wonder.
Better than Citizen Kane?
So, retire your defenses and have a good time as we dive into this week's pick.
The Hurt Locker.
The Hurt Locker. How was that? I feel like that went pretty well. I don't know.
So.
We've been keying the audience into the development of this intro. Mm-hmm. I felt we needed to address it one more time.
Yeah.
Just saying, how did everyone feel about that?
Yeah, everyone we all feeling good, everybody? We all on the same page?
That's good.
Okay,
Great.
Good.
We're just assuming that was a lot of very kind yeses, just people being like
very enthusiastic yeses.
Very enthusiastic yeses from everyone.
Yeah, across the board.
Across the board, everyone. We knocked it out of the park. Everyone loved that intro.
We killed it. I think we can retire now. It's over.
Great, yeah. But will we retire, Parker, or will we go home and decide that we're not happy and then go right back into it again?
Look, okay. Let's get into this. All right, so we are looking at the film The Hurt Locker this week.
2008/2009/2010's The Hurt Locker.
Yes,
it's very interesting. It came out in 2008, but it won Best Picture at the 2010 Oscars. Because it had like an early release in 2008 and then it was more white. I'm pretty sure.
Interesting.
I could be wrong, but I tried. I was like, I swear this won Best Picture. Yeah. And in 2008 and 2009, it didn't win, but in 2010, it won. So that was just kind of a little interesting thing.
Yeah. So this one was interesting. We talked about it a little bit last week that the reason this is here is because neither of us had seen this one. We kind of structured these first handful of episodes to kind of set the tone for what the show was going to be of, okay, here's one we think is probably going to be better, probably going to be worse. And then we wanted a wild card of, we have no opinions on this yet. So
absolutely,
it was a very interesting experience watching a movie for the first time, specifically under the lens of like how it relates back to the podcast and Citizen Kane.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a weird angle to go into a 2008 war movie and go, yeah, but how does it relate to Citizen Kane?
Exactly.
But I will say, I do like this as kind of a conclusion to this first initial, and again, we'll next week we'll see, but this first initial 3 episodes have all been very, like, they feel very American in a way, like we talked about, and like very, like, it's just been very interesting in that way of like, wow, like I didn't think that the through line of this would be kind of like, with Forrest Gump, it was like, wow, he's the everyman, and with, I don't know, I guess Vertigo's just kind of a nightmare.
Sure.
But
yeah,
I don't know. Yeah, so we'd not seen The Hurt Locker before. We haven't talked about it, actually.
We have not. We haven't talked at all about this.
This is a first.
This is fresh because we watched it separately this time. We didn't watch it together. So, which I think, like, I enjoy watching the movies with you when we can, but I think this was a good one to watch alone because now we just get to talk about it on the podcast. And
totally.
What did you think of this movie, Max?
Look, war movies are hard to like. I feel like maybe that's not a hot take. I mean, there are some people who sit down to watch Saving Private Ryan, I'm sure, and those people are probably old. And that's not like a condemnation of that fact. It's just, I feel like there's a certain level of like certain generations just watch war movies. I tend not to. I mean, again, you don't enjoy a war movie. So I can't look at this through the angle of like, did I have a good time? Because no, I didn't. Just looking at like what it is, I think it's interesting because one of the things that I wrote in my notes was, what a brutal condemnation of war that weirdly can't actually condemn it fully.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what it, and again, so it functions almost entirely through the lens of specific characters.
Yeah.
And it doesn't come out and say, hey, it sucks that this is the case. It sucks that this is the situation. But it is saying that. It's just, it can't. And I don't think I would have wanted it to. I don't think it does a bad job at all. I think it's pretty, I don't know. I mean, that's kind of the first thought that I'll say. What are your thoughts?
It was something pretty similar, I would say. I think like wasn't really crazy about it for most of the runtime. The very last scene of him deciding to go back, I was like, oh, that ties in nicely with like the quote that the movie opens with about war being a drug. I'm like, okay, cool. Kind of wish there was more focus on that fact. Like it's there, like you said, like it's if you're looking for it, like there are telltale signs of like Jeremy Renner's character's obsession with this.
Yes.
But like, I wish it was a little more overt. I wish it was a little more like, I wish it engaged with that question a little bit more.
Sure. Yeah. The question of like war as like a drug or as
Yeah. And like how that, because like it felt like there were two kind of parallel storylines going on, and then one of them doesn't really get resolved. So like you have Sergeant James coming in as the replacement and being very maverick and very hotshot and plays by his own rules.
Do we want to do really quick, just give a quick like brush up for people who maybe haven't seen it in a second?
That's a great plan, actually.
So like you said, Sergeant James, played by Jeremy Renner, is coming in because their previous kind of bomb technician and this little squad, this little patrol in in the war, in the, what is this movie set
Iraq.
in 2004, right?
Yeah, 2004 Iraq War.
Yeah. So, one of their previous bomb technician has died in front of like the squad. And so the rest of the squad is made up of Anthony Mackie's character, who I cannot remember the name of. I saw this. Yes. And I saw this 10 days ago so at the time of recording. And then there's the other guy, Eldridge, yes. And he's kind of like new to this. He's fresh. He goes to a therapist on site because he's like convinced that he's going to die, that sort of thing. Sanborn is just very much like he's doing his duty. He doesn't love it like Jeremy Renner's character does.
Yeah.
Anyway, so Jeremy Renner comes in. He's like you said, he's kind of a hot shot, and he doesn't care about putting his life in danger. He just enjoys diffusing bombs, and he's diffused like over 700 bombs. So the movie takes on this structure of there's a certain number of shifts that are left for this patrol. Right. And so it basically is just showing us like selective days leading up to them all going home. And each one is like a little vignette of like, oh, they have to find the bomb in this car at a hospital. They have to, save Ray Fiennes in the desert from these, they're being shot at. And then it's like they go to this one other, it's that kind of structure. It's more of like vignettes rather than like a full story with like little bits in between. At one point, Jeremy Renner leaves the base and goes into the city to try and find a young boy that he kind of, had befriended. A sort of, I don't know. There's just a lot of vignettes. So that's kind of the basic structure of the film. And then at the end, Eldridge gets shot and goes home early. And then Sanborn and James go home a little later. And then Jeremy Renner goes home, and then he immediately goes back out again. He signs up once again because he can't quit it. He can't quit those sweet, sweet bomb diffusing scenarios. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
that's kind of, that's a good cohesive look at the film. And with that in mind, like there's 2 points of focus, which is James's storyline of can't quit it, and then Eldridge's obsession with like, I'm going to die here. And I feel like that plot thread just kind of gets hastily wrapped up.
Yeah. Okay. I agree.
And I was kind of hoping that maybe there would be some overlap between the two, but there really isn't. Like, the only thing that really happens is that Eldridge gets shot because James can't turn it off and he's too gung-ho.
Yeah,
and
but
like
also,
he blames him for that.
He does, but also I think that the key moment where they do crossover, as you're talking about, is when they kind of go rogue from the scene that they're supposed to be investigating of this apparent suicide bomber, and Jeremy Renner is convinced that there was a team behind this, so they go off into kind of unknown territory in the dark of night. But he's like, we got to go get these guys. And Eldridge is immediately like, yeah, I could stand to get into some trouble. Like he buys into that. Like he buys into what James has.
Right.
And then he gets shot and has to go home and pays the price for it. But they don't really have like he basically tells Sergeant James, he's basically like, fuck you, as he's being airlifted away from the base. But he doesn't really say that. And I would agree with that.
Yeah. So like that was kind of my biggest takeaway, was that I wanted Eldridge to be the main character of this movie.
Yes.
I was very interested in his relationship with his therapist and him talking about all of this and like how his like intrusive thoughts of I'm going to die here affects how he lives his day-to-day life and like how he goes about his missions. Like that was interesting to me, and I don't feel like the movie was as interested in that thread as I was.
No, I would agree. It kind of feels like, and that's kind of, I think, why I felt like, wow, what a brutal condemnation of war that weirdly doesn't fully get there, because I think that, it's very, again, it's very interesting. The character of Sergeant James, Jeremy Renner's character, is very interesting in that you very clearly get the sense of like, he's kind of weird. Like he comes out here, he's diffused over 700 bombs. So clearly he's been doing this a lot. He keeps the parts of the bombs that he diffuses because he thinks it's fascinating to have something that could have almost killed you. And he's so like swept up in it that he's addicted to it basically. But I found that so interesting. Like it waits to like really drop that bomb on us. Sorry, I'm being it's all fictional. I'm not being disrespectful.
You're fine.
But at the end, he goes home and he tells his son, he's like, when you get older, you really only love one or two things. And then he goes, for me, it's one. And then it cuts to him, hard cut back to him starting all over again and as a bomb technician in the war. And that's so interesting to me, but they kind of like, and the whole movie's about that, but not really. Like you're just kind of like, it's a very interesting way to do that character study in a way of like kind of leaving it completely like you're just going to try and figure this guy out for the whole time. And then like at the end, we're going to give you that piece.
So a positive and a negative for me in this movie. A positive is I do really admire the way that it kept casting A-listers and then immediately killing them off. Like they kill Guy Pearce in the first like 2 minutes of this movie, and then Ralph Fiennes get introduced, and 3 minutes later he gets shot, and there is no like ceremony about it. No. It's just like, oh yeah, no, he's dead. Yeah. And I liked that a lot. Like I was like, that's really good, because it gets into like the metatextual side of filmmaking, but there's something palpable about like casting a well-known actor. Your audience brings into the fact that like, oh, they're probably going to stick around a while. Like, they have some sort of plot armor. And so to not have that is very effective storytelling tool, I think.
Totally.
So I think that's a positive in the movie's favor. However, given how the movie ends, and I like how it ends. Like you said, like that hard cut between, I think there's only one thing I love, to back in the army again is really good, I think. And I wish that like that was more a focal point towards the beginning of the movie, like opening with the bomb squad and seeing Guy Pearce get blown up. Like it sets the stakes for sure, but I don't think that when we get introduced to Jeremy Renner's character, it does a very good job of like telling us that we're going to be focusing on him. Because like when we get to the end of the movie and their time is up, and they're out of rotation or whatever, I was shocked that we went back home with Jeremy Renner. Like when we get back to the States and he's in the grocery store, I'm like, why aren't we home with Anthony Mackie? Like, why aren't we home with Eldridge? Like I was very confused why we were with him, because it didn't feel like it was his story. Like it felt like he was this chaotic force going on in the other two's lives because we were introduced to them first. I
agree. Yeah, that's a great point. I think that that's part of the movie is like it's playing it as if it is like, sometimes it plays as if it's like, well, this is an ensemble piece. And I'm like, it's not. It's about one of these guys. I just don't know which one.
Right, exactly. And like each of them has their moment, right? Like, again, like Eldridge, aside from like Jeremy Renner's character doing his stuff, like Eldridge gets the most screen time and his storyline gets a lot of like scenes to it. But even then, like Anthony Mackie has moments too. There's a really nice moment at the end of the movie after Eldridge has left where he just kind of breaks down in the car to James and he's like, I want a son. Like I want to have children. I want to like live my life. I can't keep doing this. And it's like, again, like you said, like if this was an ensemble piece, I feel like that would be more in the vein of what's going on, but it isn't. Like he's kind of, out of the three, he sort of gets sidelined.
He does.
Which is too bad, because it's a really good performance. Yeah. I like it a lot. I think he's doing a really good job in this movie.
Totally.
But yeah, he doesn't get the same treatment as the other two in the squad.
Right. So it's not an ensemble piece, because it kind of feels like Anthony Mackie is just kind of there with them. Because every scene that he's in, you either feel like, well, he's playing off Jeremy Renner or he's playing off of Eldridge, or, you know, like...
Which I feel terrible that I don't know that actor's name.
Well, it starts with a G. Oh boy, I was gonna I was gonna like look this up. I was gonna.
I just noticed that we just kept. I was like, man, we keep referring to Jeremy Renner and Anthony Mackie.
Brian
and
Garrity.
Brian
Garrity.
Okay. Sorry,
Yeah.
Brian.
Sorry, Brian.
You did. It was a good performance. I promise. I just didn't know your name.
Sorry,
off the top of my
Brian.
head.
You didn't then become a massive Avengers star, so we don't remember
sorry,
your
buddy.
name.
Yeah, we only refer to MCU actors by their full name
Or their character name. or whatever. I guess we only refer to him by his character name.
Sure.
Yeah.
So those were sort of my general thoughts about the movie. You sent me a very interesting article that I'd love to have you talk about.
Yeah, so as I was looking into this, I found that the first quote that they use in the movie, like they open it up by having like this quote where it's like, "And war is a drug and you get addicted to it," or whatever. Mm-hmm. The person who wrote that quote hates this movie, and he disagrees with their usage of his quote. Like they remove it from its context. And so this is the full quote, and we'll get into the article because I found the article while I was trying to research this.
Let's see. The rush of battle is a potent and often lethal addiction, for war is a drug, one I ingested for many years. It is peddled by mythmakers, historians, war correspondents, filmmakers, novelists, and the state, all of whom endow it with qualities it often does possess: excitement, exoticism, power, chances to rise above our small stations in life, and a bizarre and fantastic universe that has a grotesque and dark beauty. That's the full quote. The movie takes the first sentence. The rush of battle is a potent and often lethal addiction, for war is a drug. That's it. Right. That's where the movie leaves off.
It does not bring into factor the mythmakers, historians, war correspondents, filmmakers, novelists, and the state.
The fact that it's peddled by these people.
The fact that war is a drug. And hey, by seeing this movie, I think that's the thing that rings a little hollow for me in this, because I think if I'm going to watch a war movie, I want that war movie to be like, hey, war sucks. I don't want it to be like, and again, you can kind of have both. On one hand, I can be like, yes, these soldiers did the best they could and they saved people's lives, but really they should have never been there in the first place. And so like, for me, even being like, wow, like, heroes, I am still like, yeah, but why were you there? Because war sucks. And like, I'm really simplifying it, but I think that the thing about this movie is that it engages with it. And that's something that every war movie does. You can't fully condemn war if you're making a movie about it, because on some level you are benefiting and playing into the spectacle of it. The idolization of it, the excitement of it, and like, isn't it so exciting to watch things blow up, and and people are dying, isn't that terrible? And it's like, yeah, but why are you saying it like that? Like, like it's such an interesting, like, I don't know, it almost brings in ethics of like,
you're right.
And this movie, it's there, but it's not, because it is so fully recreating that experience. They filmed in Jordan, the country next to where the war was actively happening. And, it so much plays into that it's hard for me to be like, hey, great job,
Totally. Yeah.
Because it was made so contemporarily with what was happening that there's not that sense of removal. Like if I watch 1917, I'm not like, wow,
yeah,
you're really hyping up this war. I don't know. So what were you reading? Go ahead.
Yeah. So this article is interesting. I liked a lot of it. I didn't agree with all of it.
Me neither.
It's written pretty concurrently. Published date August 10th of 2009. So, it is written of the time when the film's coming out, which I think is good context. Basically, like, the points I agree with in the article is that the people of Iraq are not characters in this movie. Like, you're making a movie about a conflict and you are subtracting one side of that conflict completely. Like, there is no depiction of Iraqis in this film at all, aside from faceless insurgent terrorists.
Literally just like eyes.
Yeah.
It's like they create a sense of paranoia anytime people of the city are looking at them.
Yeah.
And I feel that that's very intentional, as far as just like that would be how you'd feel if you were in the military. But also you still cannot deny that if you were making a film about this conflict, you are removing that entire factor of these are people.
There was a very interesting plot point in this movie that is so close to hitting the point, but they go the opposite direction, and it's frustrating to me, which is at a certain point, they go to investigate like a bombed out school because they got like a bomb threat called in. And when they get in there, they find all sorts of materials, as well as the body of a little boy who's been turned into a bomb. And it's awful. It's horrifying. And Jeremy Renner is convinced that it is this kid that he knows from the compound who's been selling him DVDs and he plays soccer with. And like, he's so sure of that fact. And there's some passing remark back in the Jeep from Anthony Mackie where he's like, do you think it's actually the kid? Like Eldridge asks him that. And he's like, I don't know. He's like, all of them, they all look the same or whatever.
Yeah. Or and they also are like, he's losing it. Like, why does he think it's that kid? They all look the same. Like something like that.
Yeah. And then Jeremy Renner goes on his Jason Bourne excursion out of the compound to go and like find,
not to be confused with Jeremy Renner's other Jason Bourne excursion.
Exactly. Yes. But he goes out of the compound to go and find where this kid lives. And figure out what happened. It doesn't go very well. He has to come back. Near the end of the movie, he's in the compound and suddenly that same kid runs up to him. He's like, hey man, like, you want to play soccer? What do you want to do? And it's a good moment where it's like, oh yeah, like he was so convinced, but it misses the point that I wanted it to make, which is that like he's equating all of these people to being exactly the same. And it doesn't feel like the movie quite goes there. I don't know. What do you think?
I don't know. It's so, because Jeremy Renner is, his character is such like a man of few words. In the behind the scenes, Jeremy Renner is like, Sergeant James, he's a man of few words, he's doing his work, he's doing his job. And it's like, okay.
Right.
That was a very interesting experience watching that. It's very surface level. But because the character is like, we don't really hear from him, because this is shot in this almost documentary style of like, it feels like the camera is there. And Catherine Bigelow says in that same behind the scenes thing, she's like, I want the audience to feel like they're the fourth person on the squad and that they're seeing all of this play out in real time. And I was like, right. But I think that's something that's difficult to do with that is that if your characters aren't always talking, which they aren't, because it's a very accurate portrayal of masculinity, and they're beating each other up between missions and they're not friends.
No, not at all.
And so I think by eliminating the opportunity for Jeremy Renner to say anything, it makes the point harder to make. Is that, what do you like?
Absolutely. Because like there is, that's what I mean when I was talking about earlier of like, I wish that it was more textual rather than subtextual, like explicit versus implicit, because I don't need the characters to like spell out the themes, right? But like just talking about things and drawing information from what they're saying is a lot more useful than just, here's a new piece of information. The kid isn't actually dead. Draw from that what you will.
Right. And draw from that what you will. Also, like, draw from Jeremy Renner's reaction to the kid, which is basically just like being kind of irritated that he's alive.
It's a very strange reaction.
It is. And I'm like, I want to read more into that, but also it doesn't feel like it was written with the intention of like, or, it doesn't feel like it was performed with the intention of like, read into this. Like,
right.
Again, it's like one of those movies where you kind of bring in your own perception of the war and that sort of thing, but it still has more to say.
Yeah.
It's not like completely without like comment.
Right. So I thought that was an interesting thing about the article. One other thing that they talk about that, like, I'm not entirely sure I'm on board with as a read, but like I get where they're coming from, is they talk about how the decision to focus on a bomb squad sort of absolves them of any sort of like moral entanglements, because it's like, well, they're the good guys. They are doing, like, they're trying to save lives. It's not like they're going out and trying to kill people. I'm like, yeah, but they still have guns. They still are pointing them at civilians. Like, they still go AWOL to go hunt somebody down at the end of the movie, like,
and kill two people.
Yeah,
that were
exactly.
In fairness, we're like taking Eldridge away, but like you weren't supposed to be there.
Right. The article brings that up as a point against the movie of being like, well, like they have this like moral stronghold from the filmmaker, like this screen, and they don't like the fact that they have that screen. I didn't really feel that way. Like, I didn't feel like they were ever morally absolved because like they were bomb diffusers, but I don't know. What was your read on that?
I don't know. I mean, I think the reason that I wanted to, again, that article is not like by anyone of like who's related to the movie. It's just like an article that I found during my research. So I don't want to give too much like weight to it. I don't know, for like listeners, if they're like thinking like, wow, this article is really important. It's just something that I found that I thought brought up some interesting points, primarily that full quote. I thought was very interesting to read
I did
about.
like the full quote.
But I think I sent you that article not because I was like, I fully agree with this, but because I thought it was like, the movie isn't super like negative about the war overall. And it doesn't have to be. I mean, it's not like every movie has to be like objectively saying like, and we shouldn't have been in Iraq in the first, like, you don't have to do that. But I thought it was interesting to bring up an article from around that same time that was like critical of this.
Totally.
In that same way. And so I think my take on whether or not they're morally absolved, it definitely allows them to play hero more often, in that these bombs threaten the Iraqis as well as the soldiers.
Right.
Like, they're like, we're here to do this. But again, it's weird because the enemy is also those same people, because they never specify. Not once in the movie, because the whole paranoia that comes from this movie is any one of these civilians could be a terrorist. They could be trying to kill us right now. And that's what the opening scene shows too, right? Of like, you know, it was the guy with the phone on the side, you know, and like, I think that there was a chance that they could play it more as like a hero card, because they are just saving people, but they're still not, because again, there's a whole sequence where they go out to where Ray Fiennes is, and then they're shooting these two people. And obviously those are like the enemy, you know?
Right.
But like, it's interesting how it is just about, like, it's just a long sequence of them waiting it out to just kill these people, and those people. I don't know. It's just, really. I feel like they in that case, it's like, well, these are the enemy, but they're never like, they never say the names of who they're fighting. Like, they never, like, there isn't a moment where they're like, right, and this is how you distinguish these people from these people, because again, that takes away from the tension of the movie, which is it could be anybody. Which is where I think it loses me, where I'm like, well, that's weird. Like, you're just using these people who live here as like pawns in your weird paranoia game, which again, I'm sure is a huge part of the propaganda behind that war as soldiers were going over. But I don't know if I can give the writer, what's his name? I have it here. Mark Bowl. I don't know if I can give him and Catherine Bigelow like the benefit of the doubt, where I'm like, well, they were doing it because that's how the military thinks. Like, I feel like,
well, like, it's, I grew up, like I was a child growing up as this war was going on, like very early childhood. I was 11 when this movie came out. And even as a child, like, there were very specific like phrases and names I was hearing about this war of Taliban and ISIS and terrorist, and like those terms were tossed around, and there's no mention of any of that in this movie. It's just like, there again, like you said, there is no identifier at all, other than just, I don't even think they call them Iraqis in this movie. Like, there is no reference to the perceived enemy. It's just they're there and they could be anybody.
Yeah, there's no clarification at any point.
Something else that's very interesting to me about this movie that I wanted to talk to you about is, first of all, aside from like my problems with it on a story level, on a technical level, it's very well made. Specifically, like, I really love the 16 millimeter photography that they're doing. Like, there's that graininess is really, really great. I think if Catherine Bigelow's goal was that the audience feel like the fourth member of the squad, most of the time that works for me. Snap zooms always take me out. I don't know what it is. Like, just snap zooms are tough for me. And like, reading through the Letterboxd reviews was all really funny, because everybody was like, wow, this really is just like the war episode of The Office, isn't it? Like,
before I read any of those reviews that pointed that out, when I was watching the movie, there was a specific line delivery, because some of this movie is funny. There are some lines that Jeremy Renner delivers which are meant to be like, oh man, that was like, they're not jokes, but you know, they're like, they're witty. But there was a moment where he like says something and it like snap zooms in on him and then maybe Anthony Mackie's reaction to it, and I was like, that feels very that was very like, I don't know.
So like,
it was
everything else, like the film stock they're shooting on, the handheld photography does make you feel like you're there. The snap zooms pull me out. I don't feel like the fourth member of the squad when those happen, but like, I get why they're there. So like, technically this movie is very well made, and I do find it very interesting because this is the very first female directed film to win Best Picture at the Oscars.
Yes.
And I was thinking about that a lot while I was watching this movie. And I think Catherine Bigelow is doing a very good job with the direction. Again, I may not like the writing very much, but directing wise, it's really good, I think. But I do find it very funny that, according to my research, and correct me if you know anything about this, Max, to date, I think there have only been 3 female-directed Best Picture winners. I think it's this, Nomadland, and Coda. Does that sound right to you? Am I missing one?
For Best Picture wins.
Best Picture, yeah.
Yes, that sounds right to me.
Okay, that's from what I could find. That's where I landed, but I might have missed one. But
no, yeah.
Regardless,
for a split second, I was like Jane Campion, but then I was like, no, that was Best Director.
Right. Yeah, there have been other Best Director winners, but specifically Best Picture winners that were female directed. I do find it very interesting that this is the first one, as it is a very, very masculine movie.
Yeah.
And I find that interesting. I don't think it's a problem. I don't think that like female directors aren't allowed to make masculine films and male directors aren't allowed to make feminine films. But I do find it interesting that this is the first one the Academy decides to recognize. Because it feels like it is entirely playing to everything like the Academy loves about war movies. And they're like, well, the fact that it's directed by a woman, I guess we can kind of, brush past that. Because it fits everything else that we want.
Yeah, it was like, we're going to ease people into this. We're going to ease people into awarding women because, hey, it's a big war movie. It's that masculine war movie.
Yeah. So I don't know. I would love to know your thoughts.
I think that's an interesting, I think that's a very, I don't think you're wrong by looking at it that way. I think that that's an interesting point. And I do think that to a certain extent, I think that is the case. I doubt that Catherine Bigelow went into this being like, and this will get me that Best Picture win because I'm making a war movie. Like, I don't think it, but because she's just very, she also directed Point Break, right?
Yeah, like
which is also a very like, it's very like much a criticism and like playing around with masculinity and like hyper masculinity in particular. Yeah. But I do think that the Academy definitely went, okay, we can let this one slide. Like this will ease us in.
No, I don't think it's anything on like her end. Like, I don't think that she went in and it was like, okay, I'm going to make this kind of movie because this will get me the Oscar. No. I just do find it interesting. Again, comparing it to something like Point Break, this feels much less condemning of toxic masculinity.
I agree.
It observes toxic masculinity, but it has nothing to say about it.
And I think that, sorry. I didn't
go ahead. No,
well, and I think that part of that is the writer, Mark Bowl, who went out with an EOD unit for a bit. He went out with a bomb diffusal unit in the war. But do you know who he was writing for at the time when he did that? He was writing for Playboy. Oh. Which is just a fun, fascinating little thing where I was like, oh, he did like a little ride along. Who was that with? It was for Playboy.
For Playboy. Okay, interesting.
I don't know. It was just, it doesn't mean anything. I was just
but
it kind of threw me off. It's like he wrote like this like
expose
about war for Playboy.
Okay, sure.
Wow. Anyways, but I do think that his writing of this, I don't think his intention was. I think with Point Break, unfortunately I don't know the writer of Point Break off the top of my head. I'm not that well versed in Point Break.
Sure.
But the intention here was not to comment on masculinity, and yet you still get that because they're beating each other up, and you feel that Catherine Bigelow is including it, she is directing it, she is intending for us to think about it, but there isn't such a straightforward condemnation of toxic masculinity, of what kind of people that war brings out. I think that that's what really is the most interesting to me at the end, is Anthony Mackie's conversation where he says, he's like, as he's talking to James, he's like, James, how do you do this? Or something along those lines. Or maybe James then says like, do you know why I do this? And Anthony Mackie goes, no, I have no idea. And he goes, I don't either. Like, and that's a really interesting point, I think. And like, again, it's super interesting to have Jeremy Renner's character be somebody who cannot function outside of war.
Right.
And like, looking at, this is the kind of people that can enter wars, and what will they do when they're there? And they will go Jason Bourne. They will do some really weird shit. But then you also have people like Anthony Mackie, who just is doing what he thinks is right, and he's trying to serve his country.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a super interesting character to include. And then Eldridge, who is someone who doesn't seem that he really wants to be there, because as soon as someone actually died in front of him, he immediately had a crisis and was like, I'm going to die and I hate this. And it's so interesting to me when his therapist says to him, he says, this could be a great time in your life. Like he basically tells him, try to have fun with it while you're here.
Yeah.
And it's like, what? Like
at some point he's like, he says like, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. Like, I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, you're selling him on this as if it's like a trip to Rome. What are you talking about?
But again, that's like such an interesting inclusion, but it, like you're saying, it's all subtextual.
Yeah.
It's not within the text of itself.
Mm-hmm.
Which again is just very interesting to me. And I don't think I dislike it, and I don't think I fault the movie for that. I generally like this movie. I think it's very interesting. They still include 3 songs by the band Ministry from their album that was like literally criticizing the war in Iraq and George W. Bush. So like they're clearly doing that.
Right. Yeah, it's there. Again, subtext.
It's all subtextual, right?
Right.
And so I can't knock it for that.
Totally. All right, there's one more thing I want to talk to you about before we get into like judging our
criterion. Yeah.
Okay, so I have pulled up here the other nominations for Best Picture that year. And I just want to know, because I'm watching this movie and I'm like, is this a Best Picture winner? Like, I don't know. And, like, I like the movie.
Yeah. And we'll talk about it once you read the list, but I have I have an answer. Okay,
cool.
But
the full list of nominees were The Hurt Locker, Avatar, The Blind Side, District 9, An Education, Inglourious Bastards, Precious, A Serious Man, Up, and Up in the Air.
Right.
I haven't seen about half of those, so I'll cards on the table there.
So A Serious Man I haven't seen. Up in the Air I haven't seen. My opinion is that this is not Best Picture that year.
What is in your opinion?
I mean,
if you say Avatar, the podcast's over. We're done.
I would never say Avatar. I would never. I mean, I feel I haven't seen half of this, so I don't think I can say fully what I think the Best Picture would be. But I will say this. I think that The Hurt Locker I think it's the most 2009 movie. I think that if you, not as a film, I don't think it's Best Picture from a filmmaking standpoint or even from a writing perspective.
Okay.
And again, it's made very well. The writing is good enough. It gets it across. It doesn't have any glaring problems to me, really, except for what we've kind of touched upon. But I think that as far as 2009 goes, if you look at the wider culture around it, this is Best Picture.
Okay, I can see that.
I think that for the year that it came out in, at a time when, the Obama presidency is starting, people are looking back, this is post those first few years of the war. I think that at that time, it was Best Picture. But I think that as time has gone on, it's become clear that it's not. In the same way that Citizen Kane was at one point, the peak of American cinema. But over time, we have done more, and we have done things that are more currently relevant.
Yeah. So
I wouldn't say that film overall is like eternally like one of the best pictures. But I think in its moment, for that America and that time, it was Best Picture, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good read. Out of curiosity, what would you have picked? Like, personally?
I don't know. I haven't seen most. I saw most of them at the time. I remember really liking District 9.
District 9 is really good.
It's pretty incredible. But also, I remember like all of the talk around Precious was really like that's an interesting time. That's when I was like just young enough that I wasn't seeing movies, but old enough that I was watching the Oscars. Yeah, okay. So like I was like hearing names of movies and like Precious based on a novel by Savage. Like that is like ingrained into my head in the same way that like Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy is. And just these random movies that they just said so much while I was watching the Oscars that I was like, that's an important film.
That makes sense.
So anyways.
Okay, cool. I was just curious because
what are your thoughts?
About the same, like good movie, and in the context of the time, I think it is Best Picture winner. I think about that sometimes when I watch movies that I haven't seen that have been like lauded. It's the Citizen Kane effect where I watch it like, that's it. Like that was the Hurt Locker. But
Yeah.
like generally, I do like the movie. I think I gave it like 4 stars.
Yeah, I think I gave it 3.5, just a little under you.
Yeah, just slightly.
Just slightly. But again, it was a very tense movie. I think that
Sure.
So let's get into the criteria.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's do historical and like technical significance.
Okay. Do you want to start or should I? Or?
Yeah, so I know a big thing for this movie is its use of like hyper slow motion. Like I think that was a big.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was pioneering. I don't know if it was the first movie to do that, but it is a signature of the film.
It's interesting to me that when I was watching the behind the scenes, they talk about it. They have this whole section where it's like slow motion. Oh my God. Like,
Yeah.
But they talk about using like these phantom cameras, you know, and those were like a big deal at the time. And I was like, within 4 years, I was watching the slow-mo guys use these on
Right.
YouTube. Like,
Yeah.
to me, like seeing that slow motion is very cool. It still looks, but I imagine at the time when that first was like being shown, people were like, whoa.
Totally.
So I think that I think that was a really, but for me, I was like, I've seen this.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I've not seen it in this context. It's insane to watch. It's bonkers to watch a bomb go off and to watch the rust on a car like come up. But
Yeah, totally.
and that's very impressive. And that's like the main thing that I had seen of this movie before watching it. I'd
Right.
seen that clip. Anyway,
Yeah. So there's that. There's kind of that on the ground documentary style to the cinematography, which I think I wouldn't say is groundbreaking, but as far as like mainstream use is a kind of a big moment
Sure. Yeah.
of having a film that looks like that and feels like that. And then I think the other like historical moment of note, and I mean, part of the reason why we chose to watch it is that it is the first female directed Best Picture winner. Like,
Yeah.
I think that is an indelible part of the film's legacy and its historical
Absolutely.
context. I don't know. Like I've been thinking about it since I watched the movie. It feels like this one has to go to Citizen Kane for me. Like it's hard to argue with somebody who invented half of the film techniques that are being used in this movie.
Yeah. Yeah. I just am not feeling that it could. I agree. That's my
Yeah.
point. Is like I think about this, and obviously, but the film itself, historical significance. I think, you know, when we're talking about it winning Best Picture, you know, kind of my thought. I mean, I already made this clear, but like my thoughts of like it was Best Picture in 2009. I don't
Totally.
think that, you know, if you watch it now, it doesn't carry that same like Best Picture weight about it.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously, like it's, you know, it's what it did as far as like award winning is historically significant.
Sure.
But I'm gonna give it to Citizen Kane. I agree.
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
No, I'm with you on that one. Okay, cool. How well is the movie doing what it's trying to do?
I think it does it very well.
I think so.
I genuinely think it does. I was very tense most of the movie. I think every little vignette of him defusing a bomb worked perfectly. I thought
Yeah.
that they all were. I really quite liked those sections of just like watching him kind of trying to do this under the clock. Like I thought that was all very tense and like it's a tense watch in a good way. Like I don't want to
Yeah.
say it was a fun watch, but like
Right.
it was like wow. Like I was wrapped. You know, I was like
Totally.
wow. And I think that the movie never really lost that for me. There were a few moments, you know, I didn't care for them beating each other up. I was like, all right, whatever. Like,
Yeah.
let's get
All
back
right,
to
we get it.
let's get back to the other stuff.
Mhm.
And like, and I think that the movie isn't, obviously we talked about like, wow, I wish that it was more of a character piece. I wish it was less of like trying to be an ensemble piece at the same time, or that it, you know, was vice versa.
Yeah.
But that's not really what it was trying to do.
No.
I mean, it seems like they were kind of trying to do an ensemble thing, but then at the end they go home with Jeremy. Like it's not.
Right.
It's so
If it was an ensemble piece, we would check in with all of them.
right,
We would
and
check in
so
with all three, but we
right,
don't.
and so it's about him, and I think that the movie does subtextually do a very good job of showing you him as a person and making you
Yeah.
very interested until that last scene where you fully put together, oh, he just loves doing this.
Yeah.
he
Loves
doesn't
defusing
really
some
know why.
bombs.
He just loves he loves doing that. I think
That's
it does
fair.
it very well. That's my take. What do you
I think so. I would agree. I think it's doing what it's trying to do very well. It is very engaging. It is very tense and taut, like you talked about. You would think that like at a certain point, those bomb diffusing sequences would get old, but they don't. Like they still keep them fresh and engaging compared to how well Citizen Kane is doing what it's trying to do. I don't know. My inclination says to give this one to Hurt Locker. What do you think?
That's where I'm leaning towards. again, just going off, again, this is a very subjective podcast. I think going off of my reactions to both films, I think that The Hurt Locker more regularly had me reacting the way that it wanted me to than Citizen Kane maybe did in its final, in its ending.
I think so. That's
so
fair.
I think that I would give it to The Hurt Locker.
Okay. Yeah.
So
all right. Well,
me.
Tied up.
Yeah.
All right. Tiebreaker time. The final criteria. How much do you connect with this movie? How well do you connect with this movie?
I mean, connect is an interesting question, isn't it?
It is an interesting question.
How does this movie want me to connect with it?
Mm-hmm.
What does it want me to?
Yeah, that's a better question. I don't know.
And are we just like bad at reading it, or is this? Or are we just watching movies that make it hard to know?
I think we're just watching movies that make it difficult to know. Because like there are other movies that are a little bit more overt and direct in like the messages and the ideas.
Of course.
And this one is not that.
Yeah. I think maybe I just went in expecting this question to be easier each time, when in reality, most movies don't tell you what to think, which is good. I want to say that I'm on the side of that. I'm not.
I think it is
wish
good.
They just tell me how to feel.
Right. But it creates an interesting kind of grapple on the last question for sure. Well, I can gather from the film, just the film, not any of supplemental materials or articles or anything like that. Like just watching the film, it feels like the main thing I'm meant to take away from it and connect with is that like last moment reveal, for lack of a better term, of Jeremy Renner going back and being like, I only care about one thing in life, and it's this.
Yeah.
And that works for me. I thought that was a very interesting idea. I thought it was a very interesting bookend for the film to open and close with. And in that regard, like I did connect with it. Like you said, engaged and very tense during the moments it wanted me to be engaged and tense with. There's a lot of things in there that don't work for me, like them beating each other up doesn't work for me. The whole therapist comes on the ride along, gets blown up is ridiculously contrived, and I didn't like that at all.
It is.
It's
and
really
then
bad.
they immediately just move past it. They just go,
hey, move on.
Eldridge has there's no consequence. It's not
not
like
at all.
Yeah.
Like there is no, like when he's getting angry with Jeremy Renner, is he about to be shipped out on the helicopter? Like there is no acknowledgement of like, yeah, you got a good man killed. Like there none of it. So I don't like that very much. Like I think the movie wants me to be devastated. Like, oh no, like he's gone.
Yeah. Well, and like the scene almost is like, if only he hadn't tried to be so polite to those people. Like, that almost is the read. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah, it's not. I don't like that at all.
Yeah.
So like there are things in the movie that aren't working for me.
Sure.
100%. But I think there are things in the movie that are working for me. I will withhold my decision until I hear some of your thoughts.
How dare you want to hear my thoughts on the podcast about our thoughts, Parker? I think I'm in agreement with you. I feel that I was very much on the same page with this movie the entire time. I did give it the same like star rating as I gave Citizen Kane. And I think that I feel similarly about them when I think about them. Both are movies that I go, I could watch that again. I think I'm more likely to rewatch Citizen Kane again, but that's just because it's a style of filmmaking and a story that interests me more.
I can see
that has nothing to do with the quality of the films. It's just that is something that I'd be more willing to return to than watching The Hurt Locker again. Because I don't enjoy being in the world of The Hurt Locker.
No, that's not really my thing.
It's not really my thing. Ah, man, no. But I think similar to how I almost these criteria almost talked me into thinking that Forrest Gump was better than Citizen Kane. I have to also take a step back and go, just generally, what do I think? Mm-hmm. Because I think that, well, I agree with you on your points. Is my takeaway is like I think that I did more often react to this how I was supposed to, or I the emotional connection worked for me. Yeah, there were a few things where I was like, there's certain things about Jeremy Renner's character that maybe were supposed to be endearing. The way that he like endearingly threatens to cut that boy's head off and then goes, I'm kidding. I was like, that didn't work for me.
One of our friends, that was his entire Letterboxd review, was just that quote. And then I think underneath it was just, what the fuck? Like,
yeah, that was weird.
It was a weird moment.
I think you're supposed to, I don't think you're supposed to find that endearing.
No, I don't think so.
I think you're supposed to be like, man, this guy's weird.
It's a weird guy. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I think I think I'd give it to The Hurt Locker.
Okay, yeah, I agree, because I think my consensus on the movie is I think I like Citizen Kane better. Personally, I think I like Citizen Kane more than I like The Hurt Locker. Using our criteria and talking about it, I think the question of is it better than Citizen Kane, I do think it is better than Citizen Kane when we've, going through the criteria we've given. I may not like it as much personally. Like you said, I don't like the world of The Hurt Locker, and will probably not go out of my way to watch this movie again.
Yeah.
But I do think that as far as what it means in the context of film history, how it's doing what it's trying to do, and is that working for me as an audience member, I do think it is operating on a slightly higher level. They're very close. It's very close to being a toss-up, but...
Sorry, I just realized that I actually think Citizen Kane is better.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. Wow.
Yeah.
I hate to
hit me with it.
I love that the way that I said that and your reaction made it sound like I was like, I think I don't want to do that. I can't do this anymore. Like it had that tone where you're like, oh, okay, well, let's talk about that. Because just as you were saying that of like, I just don't, it gets shown, the clip gets shown, the big bomb explosion at the start gets shown. Fair. But no one talks about Sergeant James. No one talks about what the movie's about. They talk about The Hurt Locker as the war. They talk about it as like, wow, that really put me in the war.
Okay, yeah.
But I don't think that as a film, in the same way that it won Best Picture because it was about the war in 2009, I think that it very much has that. It has that same thing in the same way that like Citizen Kane is absolutely like tied to everything that it's what's his name, Hearst, right?
Hearst, yeah.
Like in the same way that is so specific to that era in America, this is also very specific to its era in America. But I think that Citizen Kane has more relevance over time than The Hurt Locker does.
I see.
Because I think that there are other war movies that are more historically significant and relevant and do a better job of maintaining that sense of forever this will be an important watch.
Okay, yeah.
If that makes sense.
That does make sense. I
think,
get behind that.
And again, you don't have to change your take at all.
No,
I think I just was like, oh, I think that Citizen Kane is better. And and again, it could be like you're saying, it could be because I like Citizen Kane more because that's a movie that I'm more drawn to naturally in style, in text, in themes. Yeah, I think that Citizen Kane is, even if I'm not like emotionally involved with it the entire time, like I am with The Hurt Locker, I just think for some reason I have to take a step back and be like, I think Citizen Kane's better.
I think you're right. Like hearing you talk about it and kind of sitting with that. Because I don't know about you. I always form an opinion before we ever start the podcast. Whenever I watch a movie, I ask myself that question, is it better than Citizen Kane? And I usually come to an answer. And then I talk about it in the podcast, and sometimes it's supported and sometimes it changes. My initial, like, as the credits were rolling, my first thought was Citizen Kane is better than that.
Yeah.
Talking about it, there are things that I think are working better for me than in Citizen Kane. Like there are elements, but like you were talking about, I do think that my gut instinct on that is probably still accurate to how I feel. That I think in the grand scheme of things, Citizen Kane is still better than The Hurt Locker. Because
again, I feel obviously Citizen Kane didn't win Best Picture in the year that it came out, but I think that over time it has proven that, again, at some point we'll have to do How Green Is My Valley, or which will be the big one. Everyone's going to tune in for that one.
Everybody's excited.
Oh, Can't man, wait. They're talking about How Green Is My Valley. Is that what it's called?
Anyways, How Green Was My Valley.
I get it wrong every time. That episode will be fun because I'll just do it wrong every time. But I think that in the same way that Citizen Kane over time has proven, oh, well, that's a more like technically and just historically, but also as far as like, yeah, it's just, it's a better film. I think that in the same way, The Hurt Locker, even though it won Best Picture in 2010, I think, again, over time, people show the bomb clip.
Yeah.
And I think, and they go, and that's the movie that won, that was the first Best Picture winner directed by a woman. But I don't think people are going back to The Hurt Locker. And maybe it's just that with time, maybe once we hit that, 25, 50 year anniversary of the Iraq War, people will go back to movies like this and be like, let's look at this. but I think that's my final answer. I think that Citizen Kane is better.
No, I can get behind that.
Even though the criteria said otherwise for me.
Yeah, the criteria
so
might have said
maybe
otherwise.
the criteria
but
just there's
well,
no guarantee.
I think the criteria gives us a good framework to go off.
No,
of,
it does.
and then we can kind of look at the big picture because you almost, based on the criteria, almost gave it to Forrest Gump. So the criteria cannot be trusted 100% of the time.
Yeah, true.
Well, there we go. That's
okay.
That wraps up episode 3. What's our running total? Is 2 better and 1 worse currently?
No.
Vertigo. Oh, no. Right. Yes. I'm sorry. Yes. Okay,
Vertigo is better.
Vertigo is better. Hurt Locker and Forrest Gump. Not.
But I would also say that Hurt Locker is leagues above Forrest Gump.
Oh, easily. Yeah, this is a spectrum, ladies and gentlemen. There is a point in the middle that teeters between better or worse, and then you have an infinite spectrum on either side.
It is not every movie that is worse than Citizen Kane is the same quality.
Maybe when we hit episode 100, we'll put together some infographic and like put it on a scale.
Oh, that would be fun.
Where movies land with each other.
Be great.
That could be fun, but
definitely.
All right, yeah. So that's our running total: 1
great.
Better, 2 worse. So
great.
I'm excited because the next time that we do this in 2 weeks is going to be a very special episode tonight on a very special episode of Better.
Oh, that makes it sound like we're going to do like an anti-drug PSA.
How do you know we're not?
On this episode, Max gets addicted to a substance, and Parker has to talk him down.
Is it going to be like caffeine pills? Is that
what
it's going to be?
Yeah, that's what it's going to be. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I'm addicted to just rewatching Herbie movies again. Oh,
I knew it.
Oh, no.
But what's going to make the newest episode special is that we're going to have our very first guest star. That's something we've talked about wanting to do with this podcast is bring in mostly just starting with just our friends, people that we know who love movies. But, we want to expand outward into other people who have film expertise of any kind. But we're going to start out strong by bringing on the second half of the Aud Brothers, which is my directing partner, Will Kauser. So Will's going to come on and he's going to bring a film of his choice. He's tossed around a couple. We don't know for sure which one we're landing on yet, but that'll be a nice little surprise for the next time you tune in.
Yeah.
We're going to have a film that Will's going to bring, and we're going to ask the age-old question of, is it better than Citizen Kane? Which I'm very excited about.
Is Will better than Citizen Kane?
Infinitely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
No hesitation.
So that's not even the question we're going
has
into
nothing
this
to
with.
do with has nothing to do with the gun he's holding in my head right now to make me say that.
No. Unless you're watching on YouTube, in which case you can clearly see.
Oh no.
Actually, no. Will's crouched behind Parker.
Yeah, exactly. He's in the precise line of sight with the camera where he can't be seen. But yeah, look forward to that. That'll be a fun dynamic to have a guest on the show, and I look forward to doing more of those. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Thanks for listening, everybody.
Take care of yourselves, and we'll catch you next time.
We'll catch you next time.